What is the biggest lie about Japan that everyone thinks is true?
A bold question, but one I'm afraid I'm too busy to answer. You see, I'm on my way to a sumo match in my flying car with my robot best friend.
Oh God.
And we're running frighteningly late because somebody ate too much sushi, didn't you? Hey? What you like? Yeah, not quite. Truth is, nobody actually watches sumo wrestling in real life. And even if I wanted to go, I can't print the tickets because I can't get the damn fax machine working. And I certainly can't book the tickets on this outdated flip phone with a web browser from your nightmares. Meanwhile, this so-called robot from the future does nothing of conceivable value other than dance like a moron. Worst 4,000 yen I've ever spent. God's sake. You know, I've often found there's a pretty big disconnect between how Japan is perceived outside of the country and what it's actually like living here. Certainly in the UK, Japan has always been portrayed as this exotic, futuristic wonderland where nothing makes sense. I'll never forget the first time I saw Japan featured in a film as a kid in the James Bond movie You Only Live Twice. An entire Bond movie set in Japan in 1967, which spent the majority of its runtime portraying the country as this alien, cutting-edge land where people spend their days sumo wrestling and an army of women were constantly on hand to give you a back rub. Now, in hindsight, the movie doesn't hold up to a lot of scrutiny, particularly in one scene when 007 needs to become Japanese. Quite literally, which pretty much involves taping his eyes upwards and strapping on a dodgy wig. And they do it all in a room that's a cross between an operating theatre and a Hooters. And the transformation is, well, nothing short of astonishing. But while Bond was turning Japanese in the 1960s, Japan was at the forefront of global consumer electronics. And with the bullet train going into service in 1964 between Tokyo and Osaka, it's no wonder the country kind of seemed ahead of its time, right? While the bullet train was rocketing to Tokyo at 137 miles per hour, over in the UK we were still riding around on a steam train up until 1968. As Japan's economy soared at breakneck speed through the 1970s and 1980s, there was a sense of anxiety building in the West that Japan would become the undisputed superpower of the future. And perhaps unsurprising, given that in 1989, of the world's biggest 50 companies by market capitalization, 32 of them were Japanese. But then in 1991, the economic bubble burst and absolutely crushed the nation's confidence, becoming known as the Lost Decade. And today, only one Japanese company, Toyota, is on that list of the world's biggest 50 companies. In reality, and in stark contrast to the futuristic image that the country has sort of fostered overseas, if you were to shoot a movie set in a 1980s Japanese office, you'd barely need to change anything today. If you were to go in and shoot, right, you'd remove some laptops for sure, but you could leave the fax machines, you could leave the mountains of paper, and it wouldn't be uncommon to see staff using these flip phones, literally kantankeitai, simple phones in Japan, because 7% of the country's population still use these. Now, I've got nothing against using old technology. I think it's kind of cool that Japan is quite conservative and they still use things like this that we forgot about sort of 15 years ago. But the truth about Japan's relationship with technology is a little bit more complicated than that. And so in this video, let's peel back the layers and explore some of the biggest misconceptions about Japan overall. We'll cover everything from food and fax machines to cultural etiquette, and hopefully by the end of this video, we'll have a more accurate picture of what life in Japan is really like compared to how it's perceived and viewed overseas, particularly in the media. Yes, hello, is that 1987? Yeah, I've got your fax machine. I love Japanese snacks, so much so I've made short work of these tasty, delicious rice crackers. Although, to be fair, the main reason I bought them was actually the kind English words on the front here, which sound like the words of a concerned grandmother. You look busy these days, my dear. Take care of yourself. I hope you live well, with love, peace, and rice. Ah, yes, the big three. Love, peace, and rice. Yeah. It's a relatively healthy snack, relative to potato chips or crisps. Of course, most Japanese food is healthy, nutritious, and fantastic. Right? Japan has one of the longest life expectancies in the world, and amongst the lowest rates of obesity to match. And I think before I came to Japan, I just assumed I'd move here, adopt the Japanese diet and lifestyle, and just sort of effortlessly lose weight. Yeah, not quite. If you read a guidebook about Japan, there's always a chapter on the Japanese diet and how people here live forever because they eat a fish. And to be fair, if you look at what people eat at home, it's a relatively well-balanced meal comprised of fish, rice, miso soup, and various pickled vegetables. On the surface, it's fairly nutritional, but if you take a closer look, there is an awful lot of sodium and carbohydrates. That's something we'll get into in a little bit. But while Japan guidebooks brag about the healthy lifestyles of the Japanese, what they don't tell you is when you go out for lunch or dinner, that well-balanced goodness quickly goes out the window. So let's take a look at 10 of the most popular dishes in Japan and try and work out if they're genuinely healthy or not. And let's start with sushi, perhaps the most famous. I bought this here for illustrative purposes. I won't be eating it, but I might eat this one like this. Pretty good. So good. Illustrative purposes. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about Japan is that people actually eat sushi like every day or every week, when in reality it's probably closer to once or twice a month. And while it's undeniable that the fish itself is pretty healthy, good source of protein and omega-3, each portion is essentially 2/3 rice. Rice that's infused with rice vinegar, sugar, and salt, making it a deceptively carb-heavy dish. I mean, if you have a full plate, there's probably a lot more rice than you realise. In my case, if I were to eat this, it would spike my blood sugar really bad, and I'd probably be knocked out for the remainder of the video, so I won't be eating any more of this today, except maybe this piece here. Oh, so good. Bloody hell. Illustrative purposes. But while sushi isn't eaten every day or every week, fish absolutely is. So it's not that sushi is the reason for Japan's healthy diet, it's the heavy consumption of fish in general in everyday life. And now I've got to put this like down here and try not to eat it for the next 20 minutes. Wish me luck. Anyway, what about our second dish, ramen? Well, ramen is really healthy. That's an easy open and shut case. You know, it's a great source of nutrition. And I know what you're thinking, oh, he's biased. He owns a ramen shop, to which I say, bollocks, we also serve gyoza. I think it's no secret that ramen isn't exactly good for you. It is, in effect, the equivalent of just downing a bucket of salt water. No matter how much you love it, probably no Japanese dish will inflict a greater sense of guilt upon you after you've eaten it. Unfortunately, that's not the only thing it might inflict upon you. A study in the Nutritional Journal in 2019 found that areas in Japan with higher numbers of ramen shops recorded more deaths by strokes than other Japanese prefectures. The high levels of sodium in a bowl of ramen being the most likely culprit. An undeniably unhealthy dish, but eaten in moderation once or twice a month at, the right shop. It's a must try. Number 3, tempura. Take the finest fish and freshest vegetables, and then batter them into submission, drown them in oil and serve them with a pile of salt. Crunchy, golden, calorific mayhem. I don't think we can call that healthy, as much as I'd like to. Number 4, curry rice. Instantly turn a plate of bland, forgettable rice into a mouth-watering treat. Effectively, just one big puddle of tasty, delicious sodium. Okonomiyaki pancakes. Well, take a mountain of batter and submerge it in a river of mayonnaise, and you've got yourself a celebration of carbohydrates. Although don't worry, there's some lettuce in there, if you look closely. Tonkatsu, number 6. Take a thick, juicy cut of fatty pork, drench it in breadcrumbs, and sink it into a deep fat fryer. And serve it with free refills of unlimited rice and cabbage. Enough calories to run a marathon, probably not very healthy again. Number 7, my favourite Japanese dish, yakitori skewered chicken. Grilled to perfection over a charcoal grill, and probably the dish I eat more than any other because I can delude myself that it's healthy because it's grilled over a charcoal grill. It's healthy, right? Well, not exactly, because when you order yakitori, it comes in 2 forms. 1, you can order shio, like salt, or 2, tare, sweet sticky sauce. So not only is it either caked in sauce or salt, but it's also a very oily dish. The cuts of chicken they use are frighteningly oily at times, and probably a key factor in the story of my disastrous cholesterol. Number 8, udon noodles. Well, the ultimate lunchtime dish is nothing more than wheat flour, water and salt. The thick noodles contain almost no protein. It's simply a carbohydrate party in your mouth, served in a rich, salty broth, and typically served with a pile of tempura to see you through as well. Number 9, gyudon. A big bowl of steaming hot rice, topped off with slices of beef and onions. Because this dish is, in effect, just a pile of rice in disguise, it's hard to class it as truly healthy, I think. And number 10, we have gyoza. Tasty pan-fried dough stuffed full of sodium and pork. Delicious. Now you can get sui gyoza, literally boiled gyoza, but it doesn't disguise the fact this is just a delightfully curated piece of dough, and in my opinion it's much better pan-fried anyway. And don't even get me started on karaage chicken. And these are just some of the most common foods you'll eat when you go out in Japan. And look at this. I've only eaten one more piece of sushi, so I'm doing pretty well. I'm not going to eat any more. But meals in Japan are very carb heavy and often jammed full of sodium. And as someone who has both a salty palate and a salty personality, that's probably why I love Japanese food so much. But one reason for the popularity of salt historically is to offset the hot, humid summer months when people typically sweat profusely and lose a lot of body salt. Not only that, but salt was essential in the pickling and preservation process, and that high consumption of salt does come at a cost. Japan has 4 times the rate of stomach cancer than the UK, and that is often attributed to the high consumption of sodium. At this point you might be wondering, well, how do Japanese people maintain such healthy weights? How do they keep the obesity rate down so well? And it more or less comes down to 3 or 4 lifestyle factors. Firstly, people in Japan are more active in daily life. There's a lot of walking and cycling to and from school or work. A study in 2008 found Japanese people walked on average 2,000 steps a day more than Americans. Secondly, the portion sizes are smaller, especially when compared to America, although I think any country compared to America would lose. But the average person in Japan is said to consume 200 calories less per day than the average American. Thirdly, people here don't typically snack that much between meals because they want to eat all the food in front of them. It's really rude to leave food in Japan. And because the meals are heavy in carbs, people don't get hungry in between lunch and dinner. And finally, number 4, as I've talked about in previous videos, there's a lot of pressure to stay slim. But there is a law called the Metabo law, and companies are fined if their employees are classed as overweight or obese. Typically, people over 40 have to have their waistlines measured every year, and if they're over, the company gets fined. That's quite a radical measure, but it seems to be relatively popular in Japan. But all of these factors are what keep obesity rates down, waistlines in check, and cases of heart disease and cancer down as well. So the reason Japanese people are healthier isn't necessarily that the food is superior or more nutritionally brilliant. It's that the lifestyle and the culture play a key role in moderating the Japanese diet. And unfortunately, if you come to Japan and end up dining out a lot or eating at convenience stores, you don't get to reap the benefits of that lifestyle or culture. The sad truth is, a diet comprised of love, peace, and rice hasn't served me so well over the years, particularly if you're as greedy as I am. Oh, so good. Whenever you look up anything Japan related online, odds are you'll find the country being portrayed as weird. Like, oh my god, apparently Japan has these robot cafes everywhere, full of crazy dancing robots, caked in scantily clad women. No, that's just one place in Shinjuku, and it's closed now. Oh my god, did you see those wacky Japanese inventions? People walking around with toilet rolls on their heads. It's mental. No, it's just a Japanese inventor who makes funny stuff for magazines and TV. Nobody actually uses them for frighteningly obvious reasons. Oh my god, have you seen everyone in Japan lives off a diet of square watermelons? Fucking hell. They're like melons, but square. It's so weird. I mean, they are watermelons that are square. That is quite weird. But they are very rare, and they're given as gifts. And I don't think I've actually ever seen one in 10 years. Now, at this point, I do feel a sense of guilt, because I can't be sitting here like, oh, the internet makes Japan look weird, when I'm responsible as much as anyone. I mean, this channel's been built off of me looking for strange, weird things in everyday life. Sitting in a room, eating a Kit Kat, and making fun of silly words. Touch bone headphones. I mean, in 2007, I scrambled to film this robot dinosaur hotel in Tokyo, and I got down there. To be fair, it was a pretty flawed hotel. Half the robots didn't work, but I did the video, put it up, and then Canada's biggest news channel picked it up because they were like, wow, weird, wacky Japan. And I went on there and just repeated the phrase robot dinosaurs about 8 times.
The Hana Hotel is staffed by robots. Chris Broad is a British filmmaker. He recently went to the hotel to document it for a YouTube channel abroad in Japan. Okay, what was the coolest thing you saw or the oddest thing you saw?
Robotic dinosaur, robotic fish, the robotic talking egg. Yeah, it must have been a slow day in Canada that day. When is it not? But with all that in mind, people who've never set foot in Japan must just think the country looks like this, when in reality it looks more like this. Like, it's true that Japanese culture is wildly different from the UK, and honestly, going between the two countries is an incredible transition. It is almost like changing worlds. But that's because of the architecture, the food, the scenery. It's not that everything is just inherently weird the moment you get out of Narita Airport. And the reason I focus on these weird stories or bizarre things is that it's just fun. You want to surprise and intrigue people. I want people standing around the water fountain at work, talking about what they saw on abroad in Japan. What I don't like, and the one criticism I do have, is often with this narrative of Japan being weird, when you see it in articles or pasted across social media, they talk about the strange stuff, they show the weird things, but they don't reveal the sort of cultural factors underpinning why things have turned out that way. Because that's the actually interesting part, right? Like, oh, there's so many vending machines in Japan, it's weird. Well, Japan gets absurdly hot and humid in summer, people need to stay hydrated, and because cities are so densely populated and people live in tiny apartments where they can't store an awful lot of goods, like multi-packs, it's pretty easy to turn a profit by sticking a vending machine on each and every street corner. Haha, square watermelons, it's crazy. Well, basically a farmer in Shikoku worked out if you put a melon in a box and grow it, it retains the shape of the box, and if you sell that as a cube watermelon, you make lots of money, particularly to the lucrative gift market. Everyone sleeps in a capsule. It's wild. Well, these days they're more popular with tourists, but originally they were for salarymen on the go. Nice, cheap option. And because Japanese people are very mindful of making noise and respecting others around them, sleeping in such close quarters wasn't ever an issue. Although stay at a capsule hotel full of drunken overseas tourists and you'll quickly discover the concept doesn't work very well. But I think if YouTube has done one good thing, it's dispel a lot of these myths about Japan. Before, we could only see the country through the narrow lens of TV and film, with the emphasis on a shell-shocked presenter stumbling backwards and forwards across Shibuya Crossing, looking like a headless fucking chicken. Because there's so many channels these days making videos about Japan, you can get a real insight into what life is like here, what people are thinking. So I think these days the weird Japan narrative doesn't really hold up to as much scrutiny, just because there are people on the ground who can show you the real Japan. Touch bone headphones. Oh God. So the first time I ever went to Tokyo was about 10 years ago for a weekend, and there was only one thing that I really wanted to do, and that was see Asimo the robot. Now, today we're all wowed by Boston Dynamics and their frighteningly humanoid robots that can dance better than I ever could. But Honda had cracked the case back in the 1990s with their P-series bipedal robots, the end result being Asimo. So I went to the Tokyo Midai-kan, literally the future museum, and I sat down on the floor like everybody else, waiting for Asimo to come out. And as the doors opened and you saw his little white figure, he came running out like a human to audible gasps around the room, and I cannot begin to express how surreal that moment was. It was so cool, pretty scary as well. And as you watched in awe as it ran around like a human, hopped on one leg, and even kicked a football, you were ready, you were ready for the future. And just as you were like, yes, the future's here, have my wallet, take my money, Asimo retreated back into his room, they closed the door, and that was it. He went back in the broom cupboard. And in March of this year, after about 30 years of research development, millions of dollars, Asimo was finally retired by Honda, resigned forever to being nothing more than $1 million party trick. Why? Now, in a country with the world's oldest population, Japan, 40% of the population are over 60, robots are often cited as a way out of the problem. And here it was. In an alternate reality, Asimo could have carried your grandparents up the stairs. Now you'll have to do that instead. But it feels like a spectacularly squandered lead, and it's far from the only example. In the early 2000s, Japan's cell phones were a generation ahead of the rest of the world. In 1999, the first camera phone came out, and while the UK got 3G in 2003, Japan had already had it a full 2 years. People were riding the trains to work, watching TV on their phones. However, instead of taking over the world, Japanese phone companies looked inwards, domestically, at the population of 120 million people. Why not? And this led to the term Galapagos syndrome. Just like the islands of the Galapagos are unique for their indigenous species as a result of isolation, Japan's inward-focusing companies created unique devices catering to the domestic population. However, by taking their eye off the ball and not focusing on software development, when iOS and Android emerged in 2007-2008, Japanese companies quickly lost their lead, and today all those quirky, unique phones we saw in the 2000s have pretty much gone, well, save for the flip phones, and 50% of smartphone sales in Japan are now just iPhones, like everywhere else in the world. One of the most striking things I noticed when I was back in the UK recently was that nobody ever had any cash on them. Or maybe it was just my friends who didn't want to pay for dinner. Worryingly likely. But gone are the days of fumbling around in your pocket for cash. You just slap your card down and watch all your money disappear nice and quickly without a thought in the world. But not in Japan. While of course cash cards do exist, like Suica, which you use for trains, Japan is still very much a cash-based society. In the UK and the US, it's estimated that 25% of transactions are cash-based. In Japan, that figure is still around 65%. Like, most people here carry 10 to 20,000 yen on them at any one time, which is about $100, right? Because shops, bars and restaurants often still require cash to pay. So bear that in mind if you're travelling Japan, you need cash at all times. There are things in Japan that you could classify as being futuristic, particularly when it comes to transport. As I mentioned earlier, while the UK is still debating what the point of a fast train is, here in Japan we've had them 60 years. And the country's already building a long-range maglev train using magnetic levitation to whip passengers from Tokyo to Osaka in just 67 minutes, down from the current time of 2.5 hours. It'll be the best $100 billion anyone's ever spent, and when it finally opens, sometime around 2028 to 2030, I'll be the first one on it. I want to ride it. And because of the aforementioned Galapagos syndrome, there are so many things over here that you just don't see anywhere else. God, this is so heavy. Oh. Now you might be wondering, why does Japan still cling to the fax machine? It's the same reason that this still exists and is still popular in some capacity. It's that number that I mentioned earlier on, that 40% of Japan's population are over 60, and older people are more conservative when it comes to adopting new technology. And given Japanese organisations are typically run by elderly employees, in fact the average age of a Japanese president is 60 years old, it's no surprise that more outdated but reliable technology still kind of reign supreme. So Japan might not be the futuristic wonderland it's often portrayed as, and it might not have the most modern tech, but what it does have gets the job done every time, reliably, without fail. And in some respects, that's probably more important than instantly getting the greatest, newest invention that comes out to the market. And we just have to hope that the last Japanese company on that list of the world's 50 biggest companies, Toyota, is able to cling on in the face of steep competition in the EV market. Still, for a significant fee, I'd be willing to sell them the blueprints to my flying car. And this flying car isn't fueled with electricity. This is fueled with dreams. Yeah, it's just two projectors, some broken panel lights and some cling film, saran wrap, really. It's all just a facade. just like me. Yeah. This throttle's called a Thrustmaster. Thrustmaster. Sounds like something you'd do in bed. Anyway, buckle up, guys, because the next point on this list is the most controversial, potentially. Away we go. Hey, Thrustmaster. Ridiculous. Oh, God. So while most of the feedback that I got on Twitter related to the misconception that Japan was futuristic, there was another one that I saw time and again that actually kind of took me by surprise at first. And that was the misconception that everyone in Japan is friendly. And I thought about it for a little bit, and then I realised, yes, there is an element of truth in that. Now, you're probably thinking, what are you on about? You awful, awful man, you're just bitter. Bitter that nobody eats at your godforsaken ramen shop. And yes, I am bitter. Especially given how busy the ramen shop next door is. Look at them over there, having fun, rammed full of customers, bastards. But it's essential at this point to differentiate between politeness and friendliness. I don't think there can be much doubt that Japan is quite possibly the most polite culture on earth. The etiquette and protocol embedded in every interaction borderlines on the extreme. Over the years, I've heard countless stories from tourists who have been lost walking around Japan, and a stranger comes and helps them and politely comes to their aid. I mean, I remember once I was lost in the mountains of Takayama, beautiful city. I was trying to find my hotel, and I asked a shopkeeper, like, excuse me, me, do you know how to find this hotel? And they got out like a piece of paper and painstakingly drew a map that even then I failed to comprehend. And at this point, they basically shut down their entire shop and personally escorted me round the streets of Takayama to get to my hotel. I felt an immense sense of guilt, and they were like, no, think nothing of it, nothing at all. You know, it was a very polite and selfless gesture in the face of a complete dickhead tourist. So you can expect to have these sort of interactions and walk into a bar and meet some locals who will ask you where you're from, what you're doing, you'll have a drink, it'll be great. But simply put, while you'll experience politeness and hospitality on a surface level, it's very hard to go beyond that, to genuinely befriend someone here and get to know them beyond those sort of simple, polite interactions. They're often over very quickly. The amount of foreigners I know, for example, who live in Tokyo and don't have a single Japanese friend is astonishing. Now, I don't think it's that Japanese people are inherently unfriendly. Maybe they just don't like me. Maybe they just don't want to be friends with me. But honestly, I think it's just aspects of the culture that sort of act as barriers to really get to know someone. Japan is classed as a high uncertainty avoidance culture. In short, situations that involve uncertainty are generally avoided where possible. People don't like spontaneity and unpredictability, and in some respects that's why things are so damn reliable. With that in mind, you can walk around a Japanese city for hours on end and no one will say hello or make the first move. And it's a big reason why many people here come across as shy. And honestly, if you're an introvert, you'll love it as people keep to themselves, and so can you. But on the flip side, it can make Japan feel awfully lonely at times. Another factor on why it's hard to actually break through and get to know someone is the strong emphasis on keeping your thoughts and opinions to yourself. And obviously we have this concept as well back home, being polite, keeping your thoughts up here. But the concept is very strong in Japan, so much so that there's two words to define it, hone and tatemae. Tatemae is kind of your public stance on something, right? Where you just say things to keep up appearances, keep the harmony, keep the peace, and avoid giving any real opinions. NFT, non-fungible token. Wow, that sounds really interesting actually. Who'd have thought it? NFT. And hone is what they're actually thinking, their real intention. And unless you're on very good terms with someone, you often won't find out what that is, what they really think. Although one life hack, one way to get around that is just to get them drunk, and then you can find out like straight away what they really think. NFTs, humanity's finished, non-fungible bollocks, what a crap. Fuck my life. So what does all this mean? What's the point of this? Well, in short, it means you come to Japan as a tourist, you'll experience politeness and hospitality, the likes of which you'll never encounter anywhere else. However, if you stay here and you live here, making those meaningful friendships can be tricky, and it's something you need to be prepared for. Relationships generally take a lot more work. Although, who knows, maybe you'll get lucky and meet someone who doesn't exactly play by the rulebook.
Go fuck yourself.
So there we have it, guys. 4 of the biggest misconceptions about Japan. But which is the biggest, and what did we miss? Go ahead and let us know in the comments. Many thanks for watching Abroad in Japan. I'll see you right back here to do it next time. As for me, I'm off to steal some recipes from my erstwhile neighbour. It's been a long time coming. Come on then. Oh my goodness. It was a blue screen all along. How was I to know?